Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Welcome, everyone, to this week's Attitude Magazine's ADHD Experts webinar broadcast. Whether you were taking part in the live webinar today or listening to the webinar replay or podcast a few days or weeks from now, today's topic, Strategies for Improving Dysgraphia, is important and helpful. Before we get started, let me note a couple of housekeeping items. Those of you tuned into the live webinar may download the slides now by clicking on the Event Resources tab of your webinar screen. For new information on how to purchase the Certificate of Attendance option, look for instructions in the email you'll receive directly at the end of the webinar. For those of you listening to this broadcast in replay or podcast mode, please log on to the webinar replay page on the Attitude website at www.attitudemag.com/podcast-322/ for access to both the accompanying slides and the Certificate of Attendance option. Now for today's topic. Dysgraphia is a learning disability that affects the ability of a child, teen, or adult to express their thoughts on paper and on screen. Believe it or not, it affects 20% to 60% of people with ADHD. In addition to impairing handwriting and keyboarding, dysgraphia also interferes with academic achievement and self-esteem. In other words, it is much more than messy handwriting. Occupational therapist and best-selling author Lindsey Biel will explain why children can't always show what they know on paper and will provide practical, sensory-smart strategies that can help them do just that. Lindsey is a pediatric occupational therapist with a private practice in New York City, where she evaluates and treats children, adolescents, and young adults with sensory processing issues, developmental delays, autism spectrum disorders, and other challenges. Lindsey is co-author of the award-winning book, Raising a Sensory Smart Child, the definitive handbook for helping your child with sensory processing issues. She is also the author of Sensory Processing Challenges, Effective Clinical Work with Kids and Teens. Just so you know, you can ask questions of Lindsey during her presentation, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can after she finishes. That all being said, I'll turn it over to the expert herself. Thanks for being here today, Lindsey.
Thank you, Wayne. Such a pleasure to be here with you and with everybody. We were talking before we started that different parts of the country are in different places in terms of whether or not they're going to school in person and whether they're doing work remotely with school or if they're doing the hybrid model. And it's interesting because the handwriting demands are going to be quite different depending on the model of schooling that students are going through right now. Whether or not a child is online for the majority of school during school year, developing the handwriting skills, those writing skills, that ability to communicate yourself on paper is going to remain essential for the student, whether they're school age or in college or, when they're out and about in the workplace. So if your child is not working on their handwriting right now actively in school, it's very, very important to keep those skills going. So again, a working definition of dysgraphia, it's kind of a fancy term for really awful handwriting and really awful writing skills that need a lot more work. So it's a learning disability which affects writing. It can include difficulty with spelling, with producing the actual writing, the letter formation, the sentence formation, the punctuation formation, all of that production piece, as well as the difficulty with ideation, getting those thoughts together on paper. And as Wayne said earlier, it's estimated to affect anywhere from 20 to 60% of people with ADHD, and certainly many people without ADHD. Now, interestingly, it rarely occurs without other motor or processing differences. So a person who's having difficulty with writing frequently will have difficulty with other fine motor or visual spatial kinds of skills, like learning to tie shoelaces, or executing a novel motor plan, like learning how to rollerblade or learn how to ride a bike, depending on what's going on and what the underlying cause of the writing disability is. So we're going to break that down for you today and give you some strategies that you can use to help your child or yourself to improve your writing skills. So it's really important to understand that dysgraphia is not due to the child being lazy or not trying hard enough, right? Kids always are trying their best. It is absolutely not a reflection of intelligence. In fact, many students with dysgraphia are actually very brilliant, very bright, clever, creative people. It's just really hard for them to pull it together and put it on a piece of paper. They can tell you the most extraordinarily wonderful stories and share their ideas and their thoughts and their feelings verbally. But when it comes to getting that onto a piece of paper, it's just, there's a disconnect. So, it's also, if you haven't picked up by now, handwriting is not just a fine motor skill. It's a very complex interaction between neuromuscular, cognitive, perceptual, and linguistic skills. So it's not a simple, like, try harder, work harder, practice your handwriting. You'll get it if you practice hard enough. I like to tell kids practice does not make perfect. It just makes it easier. So let's break this down further and take a look at some of the components which can break down for kids or just be challenging, because then we know how to address it. So we need to break it down into its components. So let's start with the neuromuscular skills. Decreased core muscle tone. Muscle tone refers to the state of the muscle at rest. It's not doing anything, right? So decreased core refers to the center part of the body, the torso, the stomach muscles, the respiratory muscles, the back muscles, the pelvic floor. So we want nice, generally, we're looking for good resting tone in those core muscles, and often we don't see that. It's decreased. There's also decreased muscle strength. Now that, as opposed to the resting state of the muscle, is the state of the muscle when it is in use. So it's a mixture of poor tone and poor, or let's not say poor, let's say decreased muscle strength that leads to poor posture, poor visual attention, and also impacts the use of one's arm and most particularly the hand. So decreased tone and strength in the shoulders, in the arms and hands also impacts the grasp on the writing tool, as well as in terms of using a pencil or a crayon or even a keyboard for a long endurance just isn't there. We need strength and endurance and the ability to keep our bodies feeling secure and safe, right? We need that stability while our hands and our brain are busy. If we're worried about, staying upright on our chair and, our muscles getting tired while we're trying to write, attention is going to be going to those things instead of what what our thoughts are and how are we going to organize those thoughts on paper, and then how are we going to produce those thoughts in writing. There's also visual processing skills. Now, this refers to, of course, visual acuity, to see clearly so you see what you're doing. And when you tilt your head down to look at the writing surface, does something happen with your eyes, with your vision, that alters it, that distorts it? So we need visual acuity, regardless of our head position, right, and the distance from our paper. We need ocular motor skill that refers to the muscles that make the eyes work. We need that to keep the visual field stable so it's not moving around, to read lines of print, right? You want to be able to read. Part of how we learn to write is by reading, and we need to be able to monitor what we're doing as we're writing. And also, of course, focusing from near to far and back again. Very, very important. Say your student is copying from the board or copying from the computer screen, and they look up and they see something, then they want to write it down. They need to be able to easily refocus their eyes, no matter which position the head is in. So, okay. So then there's also visual attention and perception, as well as visual memory, to perceive and reproduce horizontal and vertical and diagonal and circular lines, which occur in the formation of letters. So people also need to have a good sense of laterality. So what do we mean by that? The left versus the right side. Take a look at the B and D on the slide, right? For the letter B, the circular line is on the right side of the horizontal line. For the letter D, it's on the left side. If someone doesn't have a good sense of right and left, it's going to be really hard to know which side to put that on, right? I need to answer one thing here on the computer. So hold on one second. So we also need to look at alignment. So how are letters sitting on a line? Is the person able to place all the letters correctly on the line? Are they able to have the correct sizing, right? If you have letters that are all different sizes, it's going to be really hard to read. And finally, there needs to be spacing between each word, and actually between each letter. If they're squished together, they're going to be hard to read. If there's no space between different words, it's also going to be really hard to read. There's also the visual sensory issues. Our kids with dysgraphia tend to have sensory issues that affect how they use their visual and motor systems. So there's a tendency towards visual overloading. And what is that? Well, if they're really sensitive to glare, if there's an overhead light that's beaming down onto a shiny desk, and the child's expected to write on the table, on the desk, but that light's going up into their eyes and they can't block it out, and it's really disturbing for them, that's going to be a problem, and that's definitely going to interfere with all of the skills we've been talking about. Fluorescent lights are a big culprit, especially in our institutions, like in our classrooms, even in our homes. Very sensitive people can see and hear fluorescent lights as they flicker, and it can be a real problem and really interfere with any kind of production and focus on what kids are doing. The blue light from screens, right now, you probably have a ton of blue light coming out of your computer screen, and that can be very hard for some people. Patterns, colors, all of these things can contribute to visual overloading and interfere with the development of writing skills. When you have very busy or poorly printed worksheets and paper, that's an issue to consider. There's also contrast sensitivity, which makes letters or lines jiggle on a page. And I know that sounds really odd, but if you have a white page and black letters and you have contrast sensitivity issues, you're going to be moving around. And that may sound really strange unless you have it, or if you've ever had a migraine headache, you may have experienced that. Of course, thinking more about sensory issues, tactile sensitivities, disliking the way the writing tool feels in your hand, disliking the way the paper feels or sounds, the sound of a pencil on paper, the way the chair feels, can really make a difference in terms of how much a child or teen or young adult is able to focus on what they're doing and produce their best work. Oh, yes, also fine motor skills. Definitely fine motor skills. So again, we've talked about how the trunk, the core, shoulder, upper arm should be stable, non-moving more or less, while the wrists and the hands work dynamically. So those are the ones we have: stability, which is proximal, the middle parts of our body, and then you want distal control, right? So the hands and the wrists, the little tiny intrinsic muscles of the hand need to be able to do all those little fine motor moves, and that also includes keyboarding, not just handwriting. Hemispheric dominance typically results in one skilled hand and one helping hand. So one hand stabilizes the paper while the other hand becomes increasingly skilled and practices the writing. A lot of our kids with learning differences, with brain-based differences, never fully develop that hemispheric dominance. They don't have, it's not that they're ambidextrous. It's just they're equally have decreased dominance and decreased skill in both hands. So another thing is to get proprioceptive feedback from the joints and muscles of the hands and the wrists to regulate force and movement. Proprioceptive input is the sensory information that we do get from our joints, muscles, and connective tissue of our bodies. And if you're having trouble visualizing what that is, I want you to try this. You're going to put your hands, touch your fingers above your head. Go ahead and try that. And you know where your fingertips are without even looking, because your proprioceptive sense has this internal body map that is telling you all the time what's going on, where your body parts are, how much you need to move your body to achieve the motor goal that you have. And a lot of our students, and some of you, may be having some difficulty with the proprioceptive system. So again, thinking about getting those thoughts on paper, we need phonemic awareness. The student needs to be able to hear, identify, and manipulate the little individual sounds that they're hearing. They're called phonemes, right? And we need to be able to be aware of those sounds in order to process and reproduce the words and sentences, no matter how we're writing, whether it's handwriting or if it's keyboarding. Now, I keep saying student because I work primarily with students, in a variety of different kinds of schools. But of course, if you're an adult, we're talking about you in the workplace, you in everyday life, it affects all of us. Finally, for handwriting, we need the cognitive, the thinking skills to decide what to write, getting those thoughts organized and on paper, right? Getting started and staying on task, and keeping our attention and focus on what we're doing. Again, I do want to repeat, it's not because a person is struggling to get their thoughts on paper. It's not because they're not bright and, they've decreased cognitive skills. It's just they have difficulty organizing this stuff. Okay. So there's really no wonder why writing can be so hard for so many kids and adults too. And I want you to always remember that kids always try their best. And I truly believe that adults are trying their best too. So it's not a matter of buck up, work harder, get going here. You just got to practice, practice, practice. It's really frustrating. If practice alone would do it, kids would be making a lot more progress than they are with this stuff. So I'm going to give you some ideas for what to do about it, and some really practical strategies and some solutions that I hope you and those you care about can use. So the first thing is and might be a surprise for some of you, you got to start with the core, build your core strength and stability. If you are sitting all day and kind of slumping into gravity because you don't have a lot of core strength and stability, it's really difficult to pay attention, focus, use that upper body in an adaptive way. So we need to activate the muscles that give us our good posture. And how do we do that? We do that for kids, especially through playing. Active play where they're using their body in a beneficial way. Exercising is so critical to kids, teens, and adults, keeping that core strength where it needs to be. Also, dynamic seating is very important. So what do I mean by dynamic seating? I'm talking about static, non-moving, which is what we do. We sort of go into these little, I don't know about you, I'm on my phone. I'm falling into kind of almost a coma. I'm not moving. And suddenly I realize, oh my gosh, I haven't moved. My muscles are stuck, right? So we need to keep moving. We need to have our bodies be dynamic. A great way you can easily do that for your child, for yourself, is to add a supportive yet movable surface. One of the things that I really love is the move and sit cushion, the junior size for a younger child, a smaller bottom. And what that is, lightly inflated with the wider side towards the back and the thinner side towards the front at the front edge of the chair. It kind of takes that slumped pelvis and biomechanically moves it forward. So the child comes forward, sits more upright automatically without much effort, really. The spine extends and strengthens, lengthens, and the child can breathe better and see better and think better. Another idea is a ball chair. You've seen those. Those can be good for our kids with ADHD who need to move to really just feel good and feel tuned in. They need a lot of movement. These movable dynamic seating solutions are great because I could be bouncing on my cushion right now, but still totally paying attention. So you can provide the input the child needs and still get the child's focus and attention. Of course, things like standing desks are great for our kids and those of us with attention and motor activity needs. There are a lot of different solutions, and there's a lot on this in my books, actually. So other ideas, Pilates. Pilates is one of my favorite forms of exercise for kids, really from, I'll start it with kids as young as second grade, depending on the child. It's just a series of movements. You don't need all those nifty contraptions with springs and all that. It's a series of exercises that can be done on the floor. Really great for getting the core strong and stable. Yoga is wonderful. Need to be careful that these positions are all done in proper alignment. Strength training, just lifting weights, in proper alignment can be really great for getting kids, teens and adults nice and strong and comfortable inside their bodies. Swimming is a wonderful exercise. Riding horses is fabulous for building that strength and stability as well. We need to build the shoulder and arm strength, right? Zoom ball, which there's a photo of a child using a Zoom ball. I think they're now called on Amazon. They're called Zip It balls. You can find a link on Amazon through my website if you want to. You don't have to buy it that way, of course. But if you are having trouble finding that on Amazon, it's a really, really wonderful exercise modality where you're both at either end of this fun toy and opening and closing your arms and propelling a ball back and forth. And you can do that in a lot of different postures, standing with eyes closed, standing on one foot, standing on the other foot, standing on your knees with your hips extended. Really great strengthening tool. And as a matter of fact, I love using Zoom balls during breaks at school, whether it's at school or at home doing remote learning. It's just a really great reset to get a lot of full body sensory and strengthening input. Wheelbarrow walking in a plank position. And what do I mean by that? That's when someone is holding the other person's ankles, or if they're a person that's just building their strength, they may need to be supported at their upper thighs, depending on what's going on with them. And their back should always be like a tabletop. What you don't want to do is have an arched back, because that doesn't really do a whole lot, and it just builds even more tension into the upper traps, which none of us need further strengthening on because it's so tight. So wheelbarrow walking is a wonderful way to build shoulder and arm strength. Of course, climbing on playground equipment, lifting weights, incorporating this into your everyday life, pushing a grocery cart, pulling wet laundry out of the machine, moving furniture, gardening, cooking, that kind of thing. All good. You need to build the hand strength, putty and clay exercise. I love Play-Doh for little kids, Theraputty or Crazy Aaron's Thinking Putty for bigger kids, clay art projects. Resistive toys like pop beads and squidge and snap together construction toys. So what we're doing, and let me just grab this little guy. He's going. All right. Is we want to build grasp. If we want the child to feel confident holding a writing tool and writing, we need to have a good, strong, happy, confident hand going on, right? So a lot of our kids have hypermobile joints and weak muscles, but we can teach them to keep their fingers flexed in order to hold a writing tool. And this has to happen pretty early on. So I teach kids to make O's. There's a lot of this going on for kids who are hypermobile. You know, the joints actually bend upward. I can teach them that I made these little minion bumblebee eaters out of tennis balls with wiggly eyes. And you just cut a mouth out and then you can feed them anything. And that's a really great way to build the muscles. I'll teach them to make O's. I hope you can see this using zoo sticks. right? To pick things up, snacks, little toys, that kind of thing. Making O's using putty and balls and other toys that help to build those essential tiny little hand muscles that are so important with our handwriting. Okay, let's get into the writing tool. Using a short pencil, broken crayons, or broken chalk is really, really helpful for a child who's trying to figure out how to hold a pencil, right? So if you have a big pencil like this, I've got a lot of kids doing what I call a violin bow grasp. They could easily play the violin holding it that way. We want to shorten what they're holding on to, and that increases the ability for a lot of kids to hold it more adaptively. Sometimes I'll put a piece of colored tape close to the tip, so that will help a child learn where to put their fingertips, not their finger pads or their knuckles or their inside of their hands, but their fingertips. Using slant boards, easels, taping a piece of paper to the wall or even under the table can help to change things up and improve grasp. Showing you a couple of grips that can be very helpful. The Ego is the big, fat, wide one for a child who tends to have everything closed. That's better for a younger child who tends to have a closed hand. The writing claw teaches, it's got these little suction cups, and it teaches kids where their fingertips are to go. I'll give you a little view of that one. There's also the pencil grip. That's the one that's at the top, and that's really very commonly available. I've seen that in toy stores and stationery stores, and that can be helpful for some people. It softens up the writing tool. Then there's the crossover grip, and what's different about that is like this little wing that fingers fit beneath. That can be helpful. The one that I am really into, and I actually have a couple of preschool classrooms using, well, when there is school, in-person learning, all the preschoolers using this owl grip. It's really cute. In order to teach early on the correct grip. Kids really like this. Teens like it. Adults like it. I like it a lot too. It's really cute. 1, 2 fingers and another finger inside that loop. And it really creates a beautiful, confident grip. Another thing to consider when you're working on writing is the paper choice. For example, the paper on the left is really confusing. There are so many lines. Kids may not know where to put the letters, how to form the letters. There are so many papers to choose from. Sometimes I'll just make 2 lines and, an early writer, I'll say, all right, just make sure your letters all fit inside those 2 lines, like the one on the right. Lakeshore Learning has a lot of wonderful tools that you can use, like these blank writing books on the left or the writing prompts journal on the right. The thing is that kids learn early on that writing is hard for them and they don't like it and they start to avoid it. So you really want to move away from the rote practice of letter formation and have some fun with this stuff, because you want to build the ideation and you want to really tap into the creativity. It's so essential for our kids to love to express themselves, not just verbally, but in writing. So you want to do a lot of different modalities to get the writing exciting and fun and alive for them. Using back to the paper, using the Handwriting Without Tears paper. This is an adapted version of it. It teaches them that I bolden the baseline, the bottom line of it. So it's really clear. This is your baseline. This is what the letters sit on. All right. I also teach tall and small letters. A lot of kids, part of what is so confusing is the sizing. So you might look at someone's handwriting and see that that the uppercase letters and the lowercase letters are all the same size, right? There's just no difference, and it becomes very difficult to read. So all the uppercase letters are tall letters. All the lowercase letters vary between tall and small, and we'll do something like this. Once I have them write out with help, usually they're copying me one at a time. Then I'll use like an opposing marker. And for all of the small letters, I'll have them pick two of their favorite colors. Let's say it's pink and purple. All of the small letters will get a pink square drawn around it. All of the tall letters will get a purple rectangle drawn around it. Sometimes the rectangles will be tall going down. And this really concrete kind of learning really helps with formation. So you definitely want to take a multi-sensory approach to teaching handwriting, to working on handwriting. Handwriting without tears has something called the wet, dry, try method. Using a chalkboard, I will write a letter. A child will then take a wet sponge and create, let's say I made the letter A. They'll take a sponge and create a water A, and then they'll make a dry A, and then they'll try A. It's a lovely program that a lot of kids really enjoy. Writing in paint, sand, foam, pudding. I mean, I've had kids who are willing to write their name with a finger in chocolate pudding who wouldn't write it on a piece of paper, because it's a really very different skill that we're working on. If your child is having trouble with learning diagonals, you want to teach tic-tac-toe and connect four to get that idea of a diagonal. You cannot make the letter A with two horizontal letters and with two vertical letters and one horizontal, two vertical lines and one horizontal line. So we really need to get those diagonals going. And that's very hard for some kids. And for the kids who are lacking sidedness, the direction that, each diagonal, they're interchangeable. So it becomes very confusing. If you don't have the sense of right side versus left side, it becomes very difficult to learn the diagonals. You have to help. They need extra work. Apps can be so great for kids who've decided, I'm not picking up a pencil or a crayon. Forget it. I'm not doing any of this stuff. If you give them an app like Letter School, set to the handwriting without tears mode, it's a simplified mode of handwriting, they'll be more willing to practice their letter formations because it's so much fun and good things happen. Bubbles start to pop when you make the correct diagonal. There's a lot of fun feedback. So I like Letter School. iTrace is wonderful, especially for sight words, because you can program words you want your child to learn how to spell, program those in, and then they practice writing them. It's a good way to reinforce that stuff. If you or your child have a lot of letter reversals, an app called Letter Reflex is really wonderful for those reversals. When you're using a tablet, an iPad or whatever, alternate use of fingers and the stylus, because you do want people to get used to holding a writing tool, not just the finger, but also a writing tool. So you want to alternate. Now, at a certain point, you don't want to hold your thinker, your wonderful creative thinker, or yourself from expressing ideas and thoughts and feelings because handwriting is such a chore and such a bore. So at a certain point, For me, often I find like by fourth grade, if a child is really still struggling, I'm going to get them keyboarding. If they're keyboarding sooner, which is now the case because kids are doing more remote learning, I'm going to start the keyboarding work earlier. Now, I don't want kids to learn how to keyboard with one finger or two fingers. I want them to become proficient keyboarders. So if they're starting to use a keyboard, I want them to start as soon as possible, and I want them to start correctly. Learning Without Tears does have a program for teaching young children how to use a keyboard. It starts at a very simple level. So that's nice for the very young children or children who are learning perhaps at a younger level, even if they're a little older. And for other kids, I love some of the free programs that are out now, like typingtutor.com. It's free online. There are not a whole lot of bells and whistles that our kids with attention difficulties will be totally distracted by. So it's really good for that rote practice. And there are reports and statistics that kids can use to give themselves feedback for how they're doing, and a teacher or you can follow their progress. And the way I've used this successfully with kids is bribery. So you finish the program, you learn all the letter keys, and I'm going to buy you the Lego set of your choice. And I always work this out with the parents beforehand. You know, one child really wanted a Lego Death Star kit. So it's like, great, you know, complete the typingtutor.com program, and you're going to get that. And he finished it. It took him 2 months, and this was the summer before last, and, you know, end of August, he got it, and he built it incredibly quickly. Being a really bright kid, like all of our kids tend to be. Taptyping.com is a nice typing tutorial program if your child is going to be using, or you are going to be using, a tablet to do the keyboarding rather than a full keyboard from a laptop or iMac or whatever. So keep in mind that a child that sees like this can pass a vision screening. So don't assume because your child is reading that they're reading well. You know, if you're seeing like this, if you then are going to reproduce those forms, how are you going to do that? Like, it's really would be difficult to copy this as is, right? So you want to get your child or yourself a comprehensive eye exam. This is best done with a developmental optometrist, sometimes called a behavioral optometrist, and you can find one in your area by going to this website, covd.org, College of Vision of Optometrists, College of Optometry and Vision Development. So I'm sorry, I'm trying to rush through this so I can get to your questions. Another thing in terms of the visual skills is the 20-20-20 rule. Every 20 minutes, let's say we're doing a lot of online learning, every 20 minutes, look at something 20 feet away for at least 20 seconds. So if your child is doing a lot of online learning and writing and all of that, it's really going to help to look into the distance every 20 minutes, about 20 feet away or further for at least 20 seconds. That's really going to help a lot with the visual skills that you need for the writing. Speaking of screens, you want to have the screen at eye level. Right now, I'm speaking to you from my laptop, and it's up on 3 jigsaw puzzle boxes. So it's at eye level. And you want either a blue light filter, or if the person is sensitive to light, Sensitive has that contrast sensitivity that we were talking about. You can also look into, and this is fun, look into the color filters that are available on the iPhone and the iPad. I've given you the directions for how to find those. You can use preset colors or customize. I do not think, as far as I know, they're not built in to PC programs. For those, you can get there are Erland colored overlay apps for any Android systems, and you can use manual physical colored overlays that you can find online on any computer screen if you don't have access to this stuff. And I want to show you why this makes a difference. Very different visual experience you're having right now, right? Again, very different. So for some people, this is enough to relax the eyes, relax the mind so that they're more engaged. Now, the same holds true for writing. For a child who isn't comfortable writing on white paper, you may want to experiment with different colored paper and see if that is more comfortable for them to be writing on. Now, you want to deal with the sensory issues, eliminate the fluorescent lights, if at all possible, right? Switch to warm LED lights. If you go to Home Depot, they have... most of them have an exhibit, a little area by the light bulbs where you can look at the color of the light for a warm LED versus I think they call it daylight LED, and just feel those different colors. And different colors have an impact on vision and visual comfort. You can also switch to incandescent, old-fashioned light bulbs if you can get a hold of them, or halogen light bulbs. Remember that eye-level light is better than overhead light, right? That's going down and reflecting off the surface, the work surface. You want to create a quiet work area free of clutter, and provide ear defenders if needed to block out noise in the environment. And by ear defenders, that's what they call them in England. I love that term. We're talking about sound reducing earmuffs or noise blocking headphones, that kind of thing. You definitely want to get support, right? This is tough stuff, and kids are trying their best. They need support, right? And you need support if dysgraphia is affecting you and impacting you or your child's ability to get your thoughts on paper. Typically, an occupational therapist will help you with the parts that have to do with strength and stability, grasp, the actual letter formation and spacing and sizing, all of that, keyboarding, visual processing skills, and sensory processing skills. You will want to reach out to a teacher and possibly a speech therapist for the phonemic awareness, the conceptualization of what they want to write. My background is as a writer, so I can actually help my young clients with their conceptualization. There are also graphic organizers that can help people get their thoughts more organized on paper. So you're going to find more information in my books, Raising a Sensory Smart Child and Sensory Processing Challenges. Psychologist named William Steele edited a great book called Optimizing Learning Outcomes. The whole book is fabulous. And I've written a section in that. Also, please go to my websites for more information and more tips that may be able to help you and your family. So I think it's time for questions.
And we have plenty of them, as usual. This is a good one. Do schools test for dysgraphia when they test a student for learning disabilities?
Yes. It's a really good question. because, a lot of kids have, I'm going to use the term I don't like, sloppy handwriting. When they do test, and the testing is typically done by the psychologist or neuropsychologist, they do test for handwriting to see, what's going on. It's usually part of a constellation of learning difficulties.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't, ask them to.
Okay, that's good to know.
Important. And the reason why it's important is because if a child is struggling to take class notes or struggling to, write an essay, your child who can tell you a million things verbally, and then you ask them to write it down. They tell you this great story about their dog and all these fabulous adventures the dog had. And then when it comes time to write, they're like, my dog is nice. You want to get that in writing that, it's a dysgraphia problem. Therefore, my child must be entitled to the following accommodations. Answers recorded in any manner, meaning it can be spoken aloud and a scribe writes it down. The use of a computer in the classroom. This kind of thing, recording devices for taking notes. So it really is important to absolutely make sure that it's there in an evaluation.
Mm-hmm. And how would you work with an IEP or 504 team? What kinds of things would you include for a child who's struggling with dysgraphia?
Well, so much depends. I gave you the way I analyze what's going on with the child. So, there's a couple of different ways you can approach it. For me, I would approach it. Let's say the child is having difficulty with spatial orientation and laterality, sidedness. Then the goals become to recognize the sidedness. And to have some hacks, some learning hacks for how to do that. So I might have goals about, will identify right versus left side on their body, on their, different objects in space and in the written form. So, I might have those component skills as part of the IEP goals. With the IEP goals, I would have the accommodation where the child will not be required to take all the class notes. So the child will take, 25% of the class notes and to supplement what is given to them. They should be given the class notes all written up for them. So that's the kind of thing. That's a complex and very good question, but it's very individualized. Right.
So a lot, it seems to me, just based on your answer, there has to do with how specific or good the evaluation is of the child. So the specific challenges can be pinpointed and then funneled into an IEP. So who does that typically? I'm sorry, you mentioned that? The diagnosis, the evaluation?
The diagnosis usually comes from a child psychologist or neuropsychologist, or sometimes a pediatric neurologist. I have to double check that, but I'm pretty sure I've seen that as well. Right. So an occupational therapist should ideally participate in that evaluation because it's the occupational therapist who takes a look at, does he know how to hold his pencil correctly? What is his posture like? What are all these pieces? So you're not going to get that from an LD evaluation from a child psychologist. They don't have that training. They don't have those lenses on their evaluation goggles, Yeah.
We must have gotten half a dozen questions about this. Is high school age too late to develop skills and strength necessary to improve handwriting and writing skills?
Okay. It's such an important question, and it's the right question to ask. And the answer is not I can't say, yes, it's too late, or no, it's never too late. The question becomes how much is focusing on the production interfering with the ideation and with the thinking and the cognition, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if the person is motivated, if they want to work on it, I have worked on it with high school seniors who've been like, I'm going to college and my handwriting is horrible. Can you help me? And, have I turned this person into like the most wonderful, handwriter in the world? No, but I've improved. It is possible to improve it if the person is highly motivated. I mean, certainly, to become independent adults, older kids need to learn how to write a check, although everyone's paying online now. But, they need to fill out a form at the motor vehicle office. It's not all going to be on the computer, right? So when you start to connect the dots between handwriting and independence and exciting things that they want, that tends to motivate them too.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
A lot of parents have brought up the fact that, their sons or daughters' handwriting isn't in good shape, but they want to. So teachers and the rest of the world is forcing them to do keyboarding. So they never really address the challenge of the handwriting. So and they want to know how to get around that, or what you recommend. Work at home with them, or I don't know, a tutor.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, at a certain point, they're teaching handwriting itself less and less than when you or I were kids. It's pretty early on. Some preschools aren't teaching it at all because developmentally kids aren't supposed to be writing until they're like entering kindergarten. But then they go into kindergarten and say, what, you're not writing yet? And, we'll do a quick, some lessons on handwriting. And then pretty much you're on your own. You should know how to do this by now. And the teachers have educational goals mandates that they have to meet. And there isn't that much focus on handwriting anymore at all, if at all. So there are lots of different ways that you can work with this. If you are able to get a school-based occupational therapist to work with your child, especially at a young age, that would be ideal. And typically that's a pull-out kind of situation where your child would leave the classroom and work with the OT. Sometimes the OT will go into a classroom and work with one or a group of kids on their handwriting skills. Much of it depends on the school and the program. Some of the special schools spend a lot more time on handwriting. If you can get an outside OT, that would be great. I think I've given you some good tools, things like Letter School, the apps Letter School and iTrace, and even Handwriting Without Tears. Parents can implement that themselves and have a child work on it at home. It's just we can't really expect it. I mean, we can expect it, but don't expect it too much beyond a certain point at school. Parents have to really help out there.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a contingent, myself included, having a left-handed child. I mean, do left-handers have more problems with this, with their grip? Or are there special grip tools for left-handers? The only reason I bring this up is because we've gotten about 5 of these questions. So.
Yeah, the grips that I showed you are not handed grips. What really changes with left side versus right side is often we'll see the wrist kind of bending inward and kids are writing that way.
Right.
So you really want to think about a couple of things. Think if you have paper, if you're a righty, your paper, you rest your hand on your paper and your paper's tends to tilt up towards the left.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a lefty, you want to tilt your paper up towards the right. So you change the angle of your paper. For a lefty who tends to write in that cramped way because of the wrist flexing inwards, you want to really think about a slant board, or writing on an easel or a chalkboard, or taking a piece of that nice blue painter's tape that doesn't ruin paint,
Mm-hmm.
and putting the paper up on the wall to get the wrist into a better position. I think they do have some struggles, especially since they're so often taught, it's their right hand that's being taught to, that's being modeled until
Right.
it's clear that the child's a lefty. So there are some issues there,
Mm-hmm.
but there are easy hacks around that
Mm-hmm.
if you're thinking about it.
Okay. Well, that was great. I think the hour is up. Thanks so much, Lindsey, for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. So happy to be here with all of you.
And thanks to all of the attendees for joining us. Have a great day.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.